Asia Pacific praise team. I'm so sorry, Unha, where are you? I just made Unha Filipinas, and we have Chinese too, right? So that's awesome, great team. Also known as Boys Plus, right? That's a little inside joke. They know what I'm talking about. Well, I hope this is one of the last hot days because it's kind of warm outside today. So that probably people looked at the thing and like, well, it's 80 degrees. I don't want to be there. Well, it's probably already about 100 in Riverside. So I'm glad that I'm in San Marcos. Every time we drive here in the morning, you just get over this. This is God's backyard. I really appreciate being here. And speaking of God's backyard, I'm grateful for this courtyard that we have and the place and opportunity we have to worship. A lot of people today, the only condition to worship inside as far as the policy of our church is to wear masks. And I know for some of us have health restrictions to do that. So we can be outside and we can wear a mask, not wear a mask, we can be free and enjoy this. And this project that started last year, and we couldn't imagine what kind of use will be. This was not a cheap project. It cost about $20,000 that the church voted. The business meeting and the board supported it, but on one condition. And the board asked us that we make it very clear and communicate with the church that we need to raise money to pay for this project. So, and I'm asking church to step up and do this. And we voted. We did not speak much about it, but we would like to finish paying off because, as you know, it takes a lot of time and work. Plus, some people mentioned to us that the sound, necessarily people who sit in front, it's too loud. For people who are in the back, they can hardly hear. We would like to install the system here, audio system that will be permanent, that we can use this for all our social events, for our potlucks, for weddings, for all the youth events that we're going to have, because we don't have a fellowship hall. This is going to be our fellowship hall. It will be good to have it wired, that it's safe. We don't have the wires, cables hanging out, that with all one turnkey solution that we can have it all and enjoy it with the minimum work. And that project is not cheap. We have a building committee working on it. A few people step up and volunteer to help to find the vendors and the pricing. But the board decided that we need to first pay for the first phase of this project so we can enter the second phase. So I'm asking you, if you enjoy this, please consider, you can put it in an envelope or online, because this fundraiser project was approved back in the spring. Even if you go online and to Adventist Giving, you go on our website, sanmarcossda.com, there's a giving section there. You can click on giving, and you will be led to Adventist Giving page for our San Marcos Church, and there's an option there on the tithe envelope. There's a virtual tithe envelope. You can donate through there. Adventist Giving is my preferred way of giving because I can set up the recurring payments, so I don't have to stress and worry about on Saturday. And also, the Courtyard project is written in there already because we wanted to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to donate. If you have friends and family that want to say, hey, I want to support your church, just tell them, go to our website and they can donate as well. We'll appreciate. We're almost halfway there. We raised $9,000, I think, out of 20, so we only have 11,000 to go. So let's put our hands together and hearts together, which is more importantly. I also want to thank Pastor Park for organizing the baskets for our community firefighters and sheriff's office. This is not much, but we wanted on this special day, every one of us remember, if you were alive and you were an adult age, you remember where you were 20 years ago. I was just sharing with my children that when I received the phone call from my senior pastor, his son called from Germany. He was Special Forces Army, and they were all put on alert. He called his father, who was my senior pastor, and said, turn on TV. I turned on the TV, and the first plane just went into the building. And as we saw the live picture, I saw the second one coming in. I will never forget that moment in my life. And what the police officers and firefighters did that day, it's beyond. When everybody was running out, they were going in, well knowing that many of them would not come out alive, but they were not thinking about that. They were thinking about people who were trapped inside. So this is one of the darkest moments in the history of the United States. It's one of the most important moments in our history. So to bring a basket to our firefighters, to our sheriff's office, it's not much, but at least something gives us the opportunity to say, thank you for your sacrifice that you do daily. And every time I have a conversation with someone and I hear the fire truck going off, pulling on the street, I jump. I am not used to it yet, but at the same time, I realize this is the people who are doing their work, and we're very appreciative of that. So this cost a little bit of money. Nobody's asked, or required to do, but if you feel you want to contribute it, just put the 9/11 gift on your tithe envelope. Anything helps just to offset the cost of those baskets. So if you would like to take those baskets after the church service today to the fire department or to sheriff's office around the corner, it would be good to have 2-3 families or a group of friends to come and go say, hey, we're just church across the street, we're church around the corner. This is not much, but we want you to know we're praying for you, and we want you to know that we're thinking of you. So this is our little things that we can do as a church, and hopefully as we continue, we become more and more aware of community and the needs in developing these relationships. I know you've been praying and thinking about it. We hope to get in contact. Everybody's busy. I contacted the mayor's office. I contacted our council person's office. So waiting to hear from them. So pray about it, because we want to know how we can meaningfully contribute to the life of this community. We want to be the kind of church that people will know we're here. I couldn't imagine, and of course we didn't plan that, but I couldn't imagine a better topic to talk on the 9/11 than the one that I have in front of me today. This is something that's been incredibly meaningful. I remember that first Sabbath. Do you remember the first Sabbath after September 11? Our church was full. People came who haven't been to church, and it brought neighbors, friends. And interestingly enough, people shared with me, when I would talk to my friends and neighbors and said, come to church with me this Saturday, nobody said no. People went, Sunday worshipers went to Saturday churches. Saturday worshipers went to Sunday churches, because nobody could say no on this. Why do we need a tragedy like this to realize the importance of Jesus? Once in a while, they ask me to teach at La Sierra University, and one particular assignment I will remember for the rest of my life. La Sierra has a criminal justice campus, which is off the main campus. It's located in Ontario, and I didn't know the dynamics. Kind of heard about it. The unique thing about the CJ campus, they call it that. Majority of students are non-Adventists. In fact, majority of students in that program never heard of Adventism. So I walk in the class, 98% of the students non-Adventist, predominantly Catholic, which means big families, very formal way of doing religion. What I also realized, or at least I've sensed that in the beginning, not only they were not non-Adventists, they had almost zero knowledge of the Bible. And what made it even a little harder, they had almost the same percentage of desire to know anything about the Bible. It's one of the greatest challenges of me as a teacher in my life, I think, because you in a group of people who know very little about the subject, who don't seem to be too crazy about knowing the subject, and who predominantly not of the same faith tradition I am, and also they not necessarily they look at it as sort of a requirement, and quite frankly they just do it because they need to for a check mark. And speaking of academic requirements, the average GPA in the class was just a little bit over 2, which means majority of students were academically really challenged, and any class for them was work, was effort. So that I was challenged on many different levels. And then I thought, this is exactly describes our world today. That majority of people getting less and less knowledge about the Bible. Majority of people don't know about Jesus. Majority of people have now less and less desire to know about God. I was probably in the most challenging places in my life, my academic life, but also I found out 10 weeks later that it was one of the most rewarding places. Do you want to know the name of the class? Jesus in the Gospels. We were looking at the life of Jesus. And I'm so amazed that La Sierra University requires students who train to be police officers, who train to go into law enforcement, who train to go to become legal experts. Some of them are planning careers in the FBI. They require the course that's titled Jesus in the Gospel. You can't graduate with a criminal justice program without taking a class in Jesus in the Gospels. And this is one of the greatest blessings that I experienced. And to tell you the truth, first few weeks was just rough. I tried this and this. Do you know this? Have you heard of this story? And most of the reaction was, and they were on their phones. Some of them were playing solitaire. Some of them were chatting with others, watching YouTube. You know, you put the wireless headphones, put the beanie over it so you can see it and you just enjoy it. And I first a couple times I would walk through the classroom, just look to see what they have on their screens. And after that, I stopped doing it because what I saw that it made me even more discouraged. And I'm like, what am I going to do in this class? Until one day, I walked in. They were not there yet. And I was just, and the class is fun. You look at gospel, you read the Gospels, and you talk about Jesus. How I get a little geeky in that. And then the moment I get geeky with that, I lose them. I thought, and I looked in the classroom. This is criminal justice campus. The classroom that I was asked to teach in was actually set up as a real-life courtroom. So they had a judge's bench. They have a space for jurors on the side. They had witness stand. I was in the back of the class. So when they have their sort of their trials and the kind of mock trials and things they can practice in the real, what's set up as a real classroom, my space as the teacher was on the other side with the whiteboard and a projector and a computer, and I was doing slides and I was designing them and come up with, and nothing was working, showing videos, nothing was working. So I walked in that day and I saw that setting as a courtroom. I thought, and it did not come from me, I don't know why it came. One of the classes that I took on the Gospel of John, some theologians believe that Gospel of John is basically a legal document that John is making the case for Jesus. Like Jesus is on trial. If you read John carefully, you'll see how people come in and how Jesus is being accused of things, and there's a witness come, and there's somebody comes, so the kind of witness for Jesus. So the whole Gospel of John, in the language that's used there, is legal language. I thought, maybe we can set up the class that we will put Jesus on trial. So that day, I put away my PowerPoint, my notes. I just pulled out the gospel and I said, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to have a class today. Nobody was disappointed in that. I said, instead, we're going to have trial. And they go, trial? Who is going to be tried? And I said, we're putting Jesus on trial. We're going to divide into 5 or 6 groups. Each group is going to have a judge. It's going to get prosecutor. You're going to have an advocate. You're going to have witnesses, and you're going to have jurors. The only key that you have, the only way you can do it, you cannot speak your own words. The only words you can use is the Bible, is the Gospels. We're going to put Jesus on trial. I've never had so much fun in my life. People, and they actually got into it because they start arguing with each other, and the jurors were making their decisions, their verdicts, and their verdicts where they were quoting the scripture. In that moment, I realized, and all of a sudden you see the lights go off, and you realize it's not the Jesus that they were not interested in. They're not interested in the form and the style that I was presenting it, because it wasn't relevant to them. But when you speak to people in a language that they understand, and you speak in a style, in a form they understand, all of a sudden it connects with something that's meaningful to them. It engages. Today we live in a post-Christian era. People just don't, and all the conventional things, we look at the young people and say, why they don't understand? Why they can just sit and read the Bible? Why they need to do something else? This is not today is the language that people understand that Jesus, the most meaningful witness today for Jesus, is not necessarily a cerebral lecture-like information. Today people want to discover Jesus as they serve the hungry. Today young people want to discover Jesus when they go on a medical mission, when they share their lives, when they create something, when they exchange music, poetry, art. This is today's language of people. Jesus is very much important, and people are hungry, and you know this. We all know this. And I think we live, just like me walking into the class, we live in the worst of time in terms of the witness, and we live in the best of times. Because today, if we get through, the results and the outcome, it's not going to be life-changing for many, but it's also going to be life-changing for us, because we realize how alive and well Jesus is in our lives. I learned one thing that we can continue, that as much as it's exciting to be found by Jesus, it is so much fun to share Jesus. And if we try this, and those who get it well, and with my personality, I think I'm a closet introvert. When I got on the plane next to somebody, please don't talk to me. And people say, Pastor, you're supposed to hear a witness. I want to just sit and mind my own business. You know what helps sometimes when somebody turns to you and say, what do you do? I said, I'm a newborn Christian and a pastor. That kind of ends the conversation immediately. Because people don't want to hear that. But what if I ask, instead of identifying and saying and shoving this into people's face, you say, what if we are a community that shares something that continues to transform the life? So when we talk about Jesus from an Adventist perspective, it's not only about the information, it's about this transformative life, transformative example that we have. I've been studying about Jesus for 30 years, and I can't stop marveling what it has done for me, and I can't stop marveling how many different ways and how much more I want to make Jesus part of my life. You think after 10 years of ministry, 12 years of ministry, you know everything. I've heard some parents say, Pastor, we chose the church where kids want to go because I already know everything I need to know. And to me, it's always a little alarming. I also taught a little bit about for people who finish our Adventist academies, Adventist colleges, and you ask them, you know these stories, Bible stories, but do you know Jesus? And what does it mean in your life? And most of the time, there's a long pause before people can answer. And I hope that anything that comes out to us as a living as a community, somebody says, what does it mean to have Jesus in your life? We don't have to pause. But we cannot learn that cerebrally. We have to practice this. What does it mean to have Jesus in your life is to have that little carpet when the children are sitting and parents bringing them, because it's not an easy thing to do. That's the kind of church we're in. The kind of church that feeds almost 300 families every week. That's what it means for us to have Jesus in our hearts. So, looking at the essence of Adventism, we realize that Jesus and Jesus' second coming is what we're all about. But I want to make a proposition to you. What if we say that believing in the second coming of Jesus, that we become the kind of people that take seriously Jesus' first coming. Not only on earth, but also in our lives. We cannot wait for the second coming until Jesus came into our lives, and what it means and how it looks. And it has so many implications, and I want to briefly go over them. It's not very complicated, but I want to start with the most important. I can't believe that this is not the text that we memorize, at least it was in my experience, that we don't memorize along with John 3:16. Everybody knows John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world. But the text that I'm particularly drawn today, I think we should memorize and put it on our walls, refrigerators, our bumper stickers. It's 2 Colossians 9. All the fullness of God, all the fullness of deity lives in Christ's body. Just think, God who cannot be comprehended, who cannot be seen, measured, explained, chooses to come and speak and to be in the form and to be relevant to us in such a way that we have access to God firsthand directly. We don't need anybody to explain it. You want to know God? Here's Jesus. Here I am. I don't know why we don't talk and don't speak this text. This is something that we as Adventists should not take for granted. Divinity or the fact that that Jesus is 100% God is a very important part of our identity as Adventists, because it was not always the case. For the first 50 years of church history, Adventists did not believe in the full divinity of Christ. It comes from the tradition was represented by James White, Ellen White's husband, who comes from the church, so-called Connectionist church. They did not believe in the full divinity of Christ. They believed that Christ was inferior to God the Father. In fact, there was the time when Christ did not exist. And the church was carrying that belief for almost 50 years, and they did not want to enter and talk about it, and that immediately put, for all other Christian denominations, put the Adventists in a very particular group, a long time with the Latter-day Saints, believed that the Adventists were non-Christian sectarians. Toward the end of the 19th century, one event changes, and then in the beginning of the 20th century, one event changes everything for Adventism. Let me just give you a little bit of a historical background. Now, history can be boring, but this is so important, because Adventist history is never boring, as you know. And if you studied the history, not only denomination, but the history of your own church in the local community, it's never boring, because when you get a few Adventists together, it never gets boring, because they always have something to talk about. Toward the end of the 20th century, Adventist church was in big trouble. And I don't know if that's related to the fact that Jesus did not fully enter the life of the church, but the church was seriously going through their growing pains. About 70,000 members or so, some people say 65, but in that number, at the turn of the century, the church was growing, numbers were there, and missionaries were sent abroad. And while the work was done in the local communities in the mission field, at the headquarters of the church, there was a vicious political fight. The fight started with the 1888 General Conference, at which brethren disagreed with one another. Some presented a very important truth about the righteousness by faith with Wagner and Jones, but that led to the division in the church. And the attacks on one another were absolutely vicious. Just listen to the words that Ellen White writes to the General Conference president, describing her impression of an 1888 General Conference. Just the language here, we don't expect from Ellen White, a sweet lady. A sick man's mind has had a controlling power over the General Conference. And the ministers have been the shadow and echo of Elder Butler about as long as it is healthy and for the good of the cause. Envy, evil surmising, jealousies have been working like leaven until the whole lump seemed to be leavened. He thinks his position gives him such power that his voice is unfailable. Ellen White is talking about the head of the church. How do you counter this? There is theological division as well. Elliot Wagner and Jones, theology professors from Pacific Union College or Hillsborough College at the time, they make a presentation at the General Conference arguing for righteousness of faith. They say you cannot earn your salvation. It's a gift from Christ, 100%. And they get voted down, they get dismissed. Ellen White tried to take their position. At the same time, the issue of the mission to the South, a mission to the black people in the South also comes up. Ellen White writes a little pamphlet called Mission to the South, that she argues that it's important to go and preach the gospel to the black people, to the enslaved people in the South. And what was the brethren, most of them were dudes. What was the brethren reply to that? They put a shoulder around Ellen White. They put a hand around the shoulder of Ellen White and said, "Sister, you're going to Australia." Ellen White was gone for 10 years in Australia. It wasn't the only factor, but the issue of race and approaching and talking about race, or avoiding that issue was one of the factors why Ellen White was sent to Australia. This is our history. So you can imagine for Ellen White, there is a personal, she clearly sees the evil in the leadership of the church. She experiences it in her own hand. And in addition to everything else, in the turn of the century, one of the prominent Adventists of the end of the 20th, beginning of the end of 19th century, 20th century, takes a stand against the church. Church is divided as it is. Who was the most prominent Adventist at the time? Can you think? Kellogg, John Harvey Kellogg. I would ask the seminary professors to avoid answering the questions because I feel like I'm being tested here. Of course, Kellogg. Kellogg is building an empire, healthcare empire. He's so focused on his mission. But because the way the church is structured, it provides the opportunity for certain people to usurp the political power. Kellogg needs people on his side. He starts getting Wagner and Jones on the payroll. So they start working for him, and of course, the one who signs your check, you start defending. In the 1902, one of the most prominent healthcare institutions in the world burns down, and Kellogg wants to build a Taj Mahal. He wants to build the biggest hospital in the world. That's like Tower of Babel. And the brethren in the church says, look, we are struggling. We don't have this kind of money. And Kellogg says, I don't need you. I don't need your money. I'm going to write a book that will raise the money. And the book was called The Living Temple. And the book started promoting the ideas that Kellogg was carrying for the long time because he believed in what today is called panentheism. Some people say Kellogg was pantheist. There's a difference. I don't want to get into this geeky theological discussion. He basically wrote a book and said that nature that surrounds us is God. Drinking water is drinking God. Breathing air, God. Touching the tree, you're touching God. And this, as you can imagine, these ideas were not necessarily helpful, or they were going right against the scripture. So imagine being in church. We're like, well, we like good old days. What good old days in Adventist church we can point at? Because that is not good old days. People come as like, our leaders are fighting. Our missions are not funded. There's no money because it's all disorganized. We can't find the unity in what we believe. Our leaders, with Kellogg had a very prominent position, the way the church was structured in a general conference. How do you reply? What do you say if you were God's prophet? How do you address this? You can start taking issue by issue. You can get the committees. You can do this, or you can sit down and write a book. 1898, Ellen White writes the book. The change, I would say, the very nature of Adventism forever. Can you think what the title of the book? Donna, Desire of Ages. In the middle of this mess, in the middle of the vicious attacks of the leaders, I mean, the rhetoric, if you read the personal letters that church leaders write to each other, it's like, are these people even like, do they realize what they're doing? And instead of trying to reprimanding, instead of doing all this kind, I mean, very personal way, Ellen White does that. But in order to address the church, she writes the book that is focused on Jesus. And he says, this is the most important thing that we need to do. We as humans try to roll our sleeves. Let's create a better structure. Let's create a better political system. Let's create the better way to manage finances. Let's add more transparency. Let's do this. Let's do that. And Ellen White says, how about let's just start focusing on Jesus. And she writes that book. And the book introduces the idea not only Jesus of being an example, but Jesus being fully God. And the book challenges and addresses all the concepts of this from the theological ones. Who is God? Is God just water, tree, or that stone? Or there's more to that? Who is Jesus and what are we doing as God's people? Just to give you an example, if you haven't read Desire of Ages lately, I would really strongly encourage you to do that. Here's Ellen White. The command to love one another had a new meaning in the light of his self-sacrifice. The whole work of grace is one of continual service of love, of self-denying, self-sacrificing effort. During every hour of Christ's sojourn upon the earth, the love of God was flowing from him in irrepressible streams. All who are imbued with his Spirit will love as he loved. The very principle that actuated Christ will actuate them in all their dealing with one another. Desire of Ages, pages 677, 678. The publication of Desire of Ages changed the Adventist church. Something incredible started to happen in the General Conference. In 1901, brothers come to one another, people who fought tooth and nail each other, who were exchanging the worst of the things, saying, challenging each other character, attacking each other character, come, kneel in front of the other, in cry and embrace, confessing. The reconciliation that happens on a personal level, reconciliation that's happening with the church. Church gets completely reorganized. The way we have the church structured today, it started from this period of time that church worked, how to create the unity, but at the same time empower the local communities and the local churches. Unions were organized. By the way, we have a new conference president. Did you hear that? And you met him. His name is Jonathan Park. He was here just a few months ago. I tried to steal his iPad, remember? Didn't work. Maybe now he can. Now he's a big cheese. He was a big cheese back then too. The church was reorganized. During 1903, Adventist Volunteer and Mission Society, that was the beginning of the very popular ministry in the Adventist Church. Do you remember which one it is? Adventist Volunteer Mission Society? That was the beginning of Pathfinders. In fact, you know that Pathfinders started here in this conference in Riverside. That was the very first Pathfinder Club was founded. So we take, and a lot of tradition, a lot of things that we take for granted started with that book that was focused on Jesus. And that reading that book helped people to realize that the focus of the church should be Christ, not the political ambitions, not their egos, but the most important thing to come together in praying and acknowledging that we should get rid of this Messiah complex that sometimes we have, that every one of us feels like it's my responsibility to defend God, and a lot of messiahs in the church that you hear voices accusing others or drawing attention. And after reading Desire of Ages, you realize there's only one Messiah. and to get rid of this messiahship concept, and to also put Adventists back on the map of a Christian tradition, because the fullness of Jesus and believing in the Trinitarian God, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, put us back in, created this continuity that connects us to the time of the first church. Why is it so important to know that Jesus was fully God and fully human? I'm just going to briefly touch on this. The scripture tells us that Christ reconciled us with God by redeeming our past. The only person who could do that, the only person that can really realistically do that, paying the price of the reconciliation, the one who had the ultimate power in the past, is the one that the first chapter of the letter to Colossians that we heard earlier talks about it. Colossians 1. Because all things were created by him, both in the heavens and on the earth, the things that are visible and the things that are invisible. He existed before all things, and all things are held together in him. The only one who created our past can redeem it. If anybody who was or who wasn't when there was time cannot do that. The only full redemption can come from the one who created it all. Otherwise, we're always going to be short. Another important aspect, and I don't want to get there, maybe one day we'll do the sermon series on theories. The professor is smiling there. We're going to do the sermon series on the theories of atonement, how that redemption takes place. Maybe before the Easter in the spring, it would be a good sermon series, spend 4 or 5 Sabbaths to talk about why Jesus is called Redeemer and why there are different interpretations, and they're all equally have good biblical standing. But the most important aspect for us today, that in order to address the issue of the original sin, only original design could take care of this. We cannot believe that anyone who is lesser than the one who was before anything, the one who is equal to the Father, could take care of sin. Colossians 1 verses 21-22. Once you were alienated from God and you were enemies with him in your minds, which was shown by your evil actions. But now he has reconciled you by his physical body through death to present you before God as people who are holy, faultless, and without blame. If Christ is not fully God, his sacrifice would be just a sleight of hands. Somebody went wrong, and I'm just going to sacrifice somebody else for this kind of thing. I'm just going to create somebody that would be Jesus, and it'll be sacrificed. There's no personal. If Jesus is not fully God, the sacrifice of Jesus is just a sleight of hands, just a trick. Jesus is fully God who redeems our past, but he also addresses our present. He reveals to us something very important. 1 Peter 2:21. You were called to this kind of endurance. Because Christ suffered on your behalf, he left you an example so that you might follow in his footsteps. Living life like Christ did means be fully engaging in the life of those who are around us. We're not just retrieving to detached life, living in a bubble, promoting this sectarian mentality. I don't care what everybody else, I'm going to heaven. I don't care what happens to my neighbor. If people are suffering around me, why are they suffering? Because they made their bad choices. They deserve to suffer. And those who don't have enough to eat, too bad for them. Those who are not finding their meaning in life, too bad for them. I have what I have. But that's not the way of Jesus. We can't say, if I have my personal spiritual ducks in a row, I am all good. Christ says, no matter how well we are, no matter how well spiritually we are, the responsibility for this world still lies on us. This is what it means to be Christ. The very first words, recorded words in the Christ sermon from the Gospel of Luke, Luke chapter 4, verse 18, when Jesus gets up and he brings and quotes from the ancient prophet of Isaiah, says these famous words, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to preach the good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the prisoners and the recovery of sight to the blind, to liberate the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Liberation from oppression, advocating for the poor and the powerless, being healing presence in the world, taking the issues of justice as God's calling. It's a way of Jesus. That is what it meant to be human according to Jesus. This is how Christ can be proclaimed here today. Someone said, if the good news is not good news to the poor, it's not the good news. Christ has redeemed our past. He gave us an opportunity to be one with God, to reconcile with God, not to live in a life of shame. But He also showed us an example what it means to be fully here. I can speak of justice again and again and again, but the only biblical criteria of spirituality, if either you look at the Old Testament or the New Testament, it's not the sacrifices, it's not the worship, it's not the kind of music you use, it's not the kind of sacrifices they make, it's not even how much money you give to the church, it's not what kind of sermons you preach. What's the bottom line for God to look? And He talks to Isaiah, He talks to Ezekiel. He says, what's the bottom line? What's the test of your spirituality? It's how you take care of the alien, how you take care of the widow, how you take care of the orphan. Jesus redeemed our past, and He's revealing us our present, but also we have the future. 2 Timothy chapter 4. This is the text that many of us look forward to. This is sort of a retirement text. I have fought the good fight, finished the race, and kept the faith. At last, the champion's wrath, that is what awarded for righteousness, is waiting for me. The Lord, who is the righteous judge, is going to give it to me on that day. He's giving it not only to me, but also to all those who have set their heart on waiting for His appearance. Christ redeems our past, reveals our future, but He also rewards us, reveals our present, but He rewards our future. He's already there. Why is it important to have and to think of the future? One of the most powerful writings not powerful, one of the most influential writings the 21st century was made by a sociologist and psychologist Ernst Becker, who wrote a book on death and dying. He's arguing that so much in our lives is determined by the fact of our mortality. That every decision, not some, every decision we make, one way or the other, related to the fact that we are facing death. Death is looming in us, and basically, if you take the Christ out of the picture, life is just slow death from the moment we are born. If we don't have the future beyond, life loses its meaning. I can't comprehend today's rhetoric, especially comes from a humanistic camp. The people say you can be a good person without religion. Why? What's the reason? Where's the meaning of that? Only people who believe in the future and who have future, who awarded the future, can find the meaning of life. Without the future, life is meaningless. Without the future, you cannot find any fulfillment. We can try, we can fill it with things, we can fill it with money, we can fill it with ideas, we can do all kinds of things, but if there's no future, there's no meaning. We'll have to stop doing the very things that we enjoy. If there's no future, what's the point of the song that we practice, or painting that we work on, a poem we write, or the meal we cook, or a bike ride that we go on, conversations we have? But with the future, all of that starts getting the meaning. We will never run out of time to do the things that we love if we believe into the future. And we start doing these things here and now. And we'll continue. I just read somewhere, I don't know if it's true or not, that every bicycle in heaven is an e-bicycle. I'm glad you're listening. Where's my helper? Zach is not here to help me out, to wake people up, so I miss him. We will never run out of time to do things that we love and do because of the future that's been awarded to us. So here we have it. Fully God and fully human Christ. They redeemed our past, revealed our present, and rewarded us our future. He has embodied the essence of what it means to be human. So when we read Genesis 1:26, we were created in the image of God, we see the Christ. When we realize how to share this, we enter into the world today that is not Christian, doesn't want to know about Christ, and the settings are not necessarily most conducive to share, but if a little bit of creativity, look around to understand, to hear what people say can become that courtroom when Jesus is on trial and Jesus comes out victorious and the lives are changed. Without Jesus, we lose meaning. And the meaningless life is actually nothing. Life without Jesus, and I want to make it very clear, especially important for people today, life without Jesus, as far as the Advent is concerned, is nothing. There is no life without Christ. So I want to return to my original proposition, original idea, original thesis, that we as Adventists, for us as Adventists, what it means to wait for the Christ to come. That we take seriously his first coming here on earth as our Redeemer, our Shepherd, and the Messiah who brings us the future. Has he come into our lives? How do we know this? Can anyone who knows us can tell that? How about our church? This is Jesus 101 in a nutshell. For us, it is Christ or nothing. Amen.